Welcome to Australian Hunger. I'm your host, Ben. On today's show, I've got an interview with Lysithea, a band which started off in New Zealand and now is international. I'll talk a little bit about that before I get to the interview. But before then, I want to talk briefly about AI and its relationship to music. So a little while ago, I came across an article about AI and music, and I contemplated talking about it on my other podcast, Eclecticast. I didn't get a chance to do that, but there was an opportunity to talk about it on this podcast because what happened subsequently was Metal Sucks released an article about AI and its relationship with the metal community. A YouTube channel called The Dadbots have been live streaming a technical death metal music created by artificial intelligence 24/7 for the past month. Now this has been created because they have a neural network which starts small, and I'm quoting from the article here, studying a few seconds of music at a time before graduating to entire albums and eventually a band's full discography. In this case, the technicians fed their bots a healthy diet of Arcspire, as fine example of technical death metal as there is. Unquote. It's kind of fascinating because you listen to the music and you can definitely hear that it's Arcspire reminiscent technical death metal. It doesn't quite have the same resonance as their music, if you're interested in that kind of music, because it doesn't have that human touch. It kind of starts and stops in the kind of way technical death metal does in some circumstances, but it doesn't have that human approach. This is like, hey, there's a reason it starts and stops. So that's kind of interesting based on a purely aesthetic level. Where it's interesting, where this other article comes in, is the legal implications. So who owns this music? Theoretically, you might say, well, the Dadbots, they created the software, and therefore it's their music, but it's entirely generated based on Arcspire's musical back catalogue. So it's essentially replicating their back catalogue, their intellectual property. Now, I'm sure Arcspire would take this instead if they know about it and say, it's demonstrating something interesting as a project. But let's say someone tried to do this commercially. They fed a neural network the entire works of Cannibal Corpse and started releasing albums every year or so. Who does that belong to? And the law doesn't, maybe it can never account for this, but it certainly doesn't now. And I think it's something which, even though it may seem a bit soon, this kind of technology is going to get better and better, and we really need to start taking account for it now and begin developing legal frameworks to say, okay, this belongs to this person, that belongs to that person, these circumstances, this person has intellectual property rights. In a broader sort of understanding of this trend, I'm not necessarily that worried. I think the human touch is incredibly important, and I think that's going to be very important for a long time to come, but gradually it represents the ability of technology to develop our artistic products, and that's going to be something really, really interesting to see how it continues into the future. So Lysithea are a band which were originally based in New Zealand. The original member, Mike Lamb, released 2 EPs and an album, and then he invited Mike Wilson, his friend from previous musical projects, to move the band in a more doomier, heavier direction and perform vocals on the album. Then Mike Lamb moved overseas, and Mike Wilson made the entire 4th album on his own. Really, really interesting, and that's part of the reason why it was such a good opportunity to chat with them. So I played 2 songs in the interview, Away and Unearthly Burial. This is Mike Lamb and Mike Wilson. So I want to start off at the very beginning, and this is really fascinating to me, this whole sort of how the band sort of progressed. But let's go back to the beginning. Mike Lamb, you were the initial person behind the band. Talk a little bit about what your kind of musical experience was prior to starting Lysithea.
Before that, me and Mike Wilson We had a kind of melodic death style band back in was it 2004?
Yeah, it would have started about then when we were sort of teenagers. I was about sort of, I guess, 15 or so, and Mike's a couple of years older. So yeah, sort of that was our first meeting musically, anyway.
Yeah. So we had that, and we did that for a few years, and then I split off and sort of created another band, and so that was called Undoing the End, and then the other band was sort of more sort of like mid 2000s sort of melodic deathy, vaguely metalcore-y band out of Agony, and Mike Wilson actually ended up joining that eventually too on bass. But it was sort of the local band kind of thing, and there's not much of a scene in Dunedin for sort of a more like progressive-y metal sort of that sort of sound. So I just basically learned how to record at home and stuff, bought some gear, and just started writing. I didn't really have any intention like for what I wanted it to sound like. I just sort of was just writing whatever sounded natural to me, I guess. And then I couldn't find a vocalist at the time that could do what I wanted to do, so they ended up being instrumental albums, which I kind of regret in a way because I didn't want them to be instrumental. That was just kind of how it panned out.
So what was the urge to make progressive style music as opposed to some of the other more melodic death metal that you were working on, prior and at the time?
I guess I just really loved a lot of doom and stuff like that, but also like bands like November and Catatonia and stuff. And I wanted to do some stuff more along the lines of that, maybe mixed up with a bit of kind of post-rock and that kind of stuff. So I just found that the stuff I was writing just sounded more like that, which were my sort of influences at the time. So I just went down that road. And then eventually, a bit later, I decided to make it more doom, and that's when I got Mike Wilson on board. So
why did you choose the name for it?
I'm a huge space fan, and a few of my studies at uni were to do with sort of physics and space. And for some reason, I just always loved the moon, Lysithea. I don't know why. I just thought it was a really cool name, and nobody else had taken it. Turned out there was like a really small Indonesian band that had taken the name, but that's never been a problem. Yeah.
So you released 2 EPs, an album by yourself. Talk a little bit about those, kind of what you were sort of feeling during those first 3 releases.
I was just sort of, to be honest, I was just sort of writing what came most natural to me, and that, I guess, the style on those releases is sort of what just comes out when I sit down and write most naturally. Like, I guess I didn't really have any intention. I guess there's some kind of disparate stuff as well. There's sort of like some straight piano songs, and then there's some slightly doomy stuff, some post-rocky stuff, and that's kind of just what I most naturally write. And around that time, like, one of my childhood friends, he actually committed suicide, and my auntie died as well. So, like, it was just a really good thing to get lost in, and just focus on writing music and recording music as opposed to sort of dealing with other stuff in life, I suppose. So it was actually a really sort of important thing at that point in my life to sort of get out. So that was good. It was good to have that.
And talk about the change when Mike Wilson comes into the band.
So at the very, very start, when I was sort of just sitting down to decide what I wanted to do with the band, I'd wanted it to be a kind of more doomy thing, sort of like Draconian-y, Morning Beloved kind of thing. And then I went down that more post-rocky, progressive metal kind of avenue. And then I decided that I just wanted to go full doom. And I think I put a thing up on Facebook saying that I wanted to find a vocalist. And Mike had been living in Wellington, which is in the North Island of New Zealand. So he'd been living away from me for a few years, and he got in touch with me on Facebook and just said, he's never done vocals before, so he wanted to give it a stab. And that sort of got us writing together again, which was really cool.
Now, this was one of the really fascinating things I kind of saw about those next 2 albums. They weren't necessarily you guys writing together. You kind of wrote your own songs, if I'm sort of reading the credits correctly.
yeah, like Mike and I guess from our background playing in bands together when we still have both still in Dunedin, we just sort of quite in sync with our styles, and we sort of both know what each of us likes in the song, and can start here and end in a different direction, and we sort of have full confidence in each other's ability to take songs where they need to go. So even though we're in different cities, it was quite I guess the trust was there that we can just sort of both compile our own songs, and that they would fit nicely together as a full album. So basically, when I joined the band, and Mike had actually had a few tracks put aside, which ended up becoming the Forgotten Place EP. So that was the last of the instrumental music. We ended up just sort of going in the new direction, and we wrote Secret Fate of All Life from scratch as a two-piece. So we both rewrote half the album each, and recorded all the instruments ourselves before meeting up in Dunedin and recording the vocals and mixing it together. So I guess it's a bit of a weird way in some respects to put together a whole full length, but it seems to work for us. Yeah.
And Mike Wilson, what was your sort of experience with Doom, with the sort of slower, heavier music, and what kind of attracted to it as well that you wanted to join in on this sort of change in the band?
Well, I suppose I've been a big fan of that style for a long time. Like Mike, his influences and mine are very similar. So bands like Morning Beloved and My Dying Bride, that whole kind of just sort of dark death doom style that's been going since the 90s has always been a massive influence on the both of us. And so I guess when Mike reached out saying that he wanted a vocalist in the band, I'd been living, like Mike said, I'd been living in Wellington, and I'd been playing guitar in a local band up there, which is sort of had ended before this happened. And so I was just really keen to get back into writing music again, and so this just was a great opportunity to do that. And vocals is I was pretty inexperienced at the time, to some extent I still am, but I was just really keen to give it a shot and just see what we could come up with after sort of 5 or 6 years of not making music together.
You obviously played bass in the previous band. You're playing guitar, so you weren't of want to do musical instruments. Why did you want to sort of branch out, expand into this sort of new territory of vocals?
I suppose it's just another challenge, really. I guess I'd done like very few sort of backing vocals in previous bands when we were playing live, and it was always a bit of fun. So I guess it's just a way to progress your sort of, I guess, musical repertoire in a way. And because it's a studio only band, it's just a good way that we can just push the songs in the direction that we want it to go. When you're writing full songs, you have a good idea of how you want them to end up. And so when you're taking charge of the vocals as well, you can just sort of help taper them to what you want to do and hopefully end up with the result that you want. So I don't know, I guess it's just another challenge, and it was just going to be interesting to see how it panned out in the end, and reasonably pleased. I mean, they're a bit rough at times, especially on those earlier albums, but I'm pretty happy with how it turns out, and I think they're getting better as I do more of them. So yeah.
So you released that album in 2014. You released Realms in 2015, and then I want to in a moment I want to get to the newest album and talk sort of about the change for that one, the additional change. But I want to sort of dive a little bit deeper on the whole you guys working on half the album. Do you guys have like? I know you're kind of trying to make a cohesive product. But do you guys feel you have any kind of, within that sort of, I don't know, thing you're trying to choose, do you guys have anything that you feel differentiates you in the way you, I don't know, approach, in the way that particular songs manifest, anything like that?
Sorry, do you mean just in the way that we individually approach songs?
Yeah.
You
I
go,
think
Mike.
I tend to be a little more. My songs tend to end up a little more melodic and kind of epic, and I guess Mike's tend to be some of the darker ones, perhaps. I mean, we both have crossovers into each of them, but I think my songs tend to be a little cheesier, I guess.
I don't know about that, man. I think, yeah, I don't know. It's really hard to sort of pick them out. There's a definite difference in style there, but it just ties in so nicely that I think a lot of the time you couldn't really be sure who wrote what if it wasn't sort of written down. But I think you're right, Mike. I think I don't know. I think yours are a lot more. Your tracks seem to be. There's a lot more of a focus on sort of like a. I know our music's full of lead guitars and stuff like that, but Mike's tend to sort of follow that a bit more, whereas I might have a little bit more space in the songs. Maybe I don't know. Potentially, I don't know. I don't really know.
Yeah, I tend to stack up, I guess, a lot of harmonies and a lot of like busier leads, and yours tend to be quite a lot more on that sort of old school sort of Candlemassy, like just rocking out riffs kind of stuff.
Yeah, just the kind of like long kind of elongated kind of legato leads and stuff rather than anything too busy. Apart from when you throw a guitar solo in, of course, that's I can't help myself in some tracks.
Yeah, I think sort of listening to those albums, it's you'd have to kind of pass it out and go through each track and go, okay, what's Mike doing there? What's the other Mike doing there? But yeah, I think that's kind of a really good approach in some ways if you can make it work, because it kind of gives you that variety that albums sort of need within the kind of area they're trying to work.
Yeah.
So this next album. So you release Realms in 2015, and then we're sort of on the way to 2019. Talk a little bit about what changes in between then and now, and how this album sort of begins.
So I suppose the main change that has happened since Realms came out is that Mike Lamb moved over to Scotland, and was it in 2015, Mike? Not long after Realms came out.
Yeah, late 2015.
Yeah, so Mike moved over there with his wife, who is studying in Scotland, and so that just added more distance onto the band, I guess. And we've got Mike started up another band called Sojourner in 2015 as well, which I ended up joining later on that year as the bassist. And so during the time between and the new album Star-Crossed, we've put out a couple of albums with Sojourner, which has taken up quite a lot of time, I guess. So probably a big reason for the 4-year gap is just coordinating the two bands, as well as big life changes, that kind of thing. I moved back from Wellington to Dunedin in 2016 as well. So yeah, we're both in a different place than we were when we made Realms. And yeah, I guess just as life's gotten busier, just it's changed sort of how much we can sit down and make music, So I guess that'll explain at least the time frame in between the two albums.
I guess the biggest difference too is on Star-Crossed. I mean, it's entirely Mike Wilson, because with Sojourner, sort of when we did the two albums, I sort of was really, obviously, me and Chloe, my wife, we both just write basically everything. So I was really entrenched in that, and Mike sort of had started on new Lysithea, and the intention was always that we were going to both sort of keep collaborating. But I just got so busy with the Sojourner stuff that Mike eventually just sent me this really, really great collection of songs. So I just suggested that he just, puts the whole album together himself, because this stuff he had given me was like far and away the best Lysithea stuff we'd ever had. So, I mean, this is entirely Wilson on Star-Crossed, start to finish, all the recording, all the songwriting.
Now, that's really interesting because, obviously you're more than capable of writing the whole album. You'd written half of the previous two albums. But talk a little bit about, I don't know, how you approach, if that differs anyway in how you approach the album, knowing that you're entirely responsible for the writing, recording.
I suppose it's when you think about an album as a whole, you want it to flow from start to finish. And so with the previous two albums, with both of us writing half of them each, we sort of focused a lot on we'd have our songs, and the track order was really important to see how they flowed as a whole, and they had to tie in with each other. So if you take Realms, for example, like there's a faster track at the beginning there, and there's a couple of like slower, kind of more brooding, almost like ballad type songs in there. So we had to sort of stack up what we'd written and make it fit as an album together. Whereas with Starcry, I suppose it's just a matter of you just write what you want to write, and sort of I had a bit of a direction for the album. And I suppose once you're in the zone and knowing that you're going to be writing more songs than just two or three, it's I suppose in some respects it's easier because once you're in the zone, they just kind of keep flowing, and if it's written in the same sort of time frame, they all just they just tie in together quite nicely, and you don't have to worry about it sounding a bit too piecemeal or anything like that. And I guess in terms of the recording aspect, it was just the songs have been written for quite a long time. I started writing a couple of the tracks not long after we had finished Realms, actually. A couple of the earliest demos stem back to 2015. And so it was just a process of when I had time to sit down and work on them and just sort of refine them a lot more until I had the end product. And it just, like Mike said, in that time frame where he was a bit busier with the other band, and by the time I realized I had an album's worth of material, it just made sense to throw it all together. And it sounded like a Lysithea album. It didn't sound like it needed to be, it was always going to be released under the Lysithea name, so that's what ended up happening.
Dive a little bit deeper into how you approach writing. What kind of environments, moods, how you approach that particular task.
So I guess a lot of the songs that I wrote, particularly for this album, there might be one sort of melody or a motif that pops up. It's generally written on guitar, sometimes on the keyboard. And if it evokes some sort of atmosphere, I tend to just try and capture that and write some more similar ideas that kind of stretch that out over the course of a song or a full album. So, a lot of the atmospheres and moods of this album, at least each track, sort of stem from one idea. There's just something about, I don't know what happens when we go to write Lysithea. There's just, there's something in the sound of, I don't know if it's the guitar tones or if it's just the note phrasings and, hearing of notes, that kind of thing. But it always just evokes this big sort of like cosmic atmosphere. And so I guess I try and just run with that. And I think, the songs just end up building and getting more and more sort of, I guess, otherworldly is the end of the, the aim for it at the end. Just big, spacey atmospheres is what I was going for. And I think I achieved that pretty well with this album.
Now, is there any collaboration between you guys during that process? Is there any like, hey, what do you think of this? Should I do that? Should I do that?
Absolutely. So, like the band's definitely still, Mike was very involved with it during the whole writing process. So I'd send him all the demos for the songs and any tweaks, and Mike mixed and mastered the whole album once all the demos were done. So what
Mike was basically saying was he he sends me a lot. He sends me all the demos and stuff. But I mean, to be honest, with all the songs that we've done for the band, generally, it's good because you've got the freedom to just do whatever you want. And when you come in with the final song, usually, one or both of us, whoever, if I show Mike a song, he's always like, yeah, that's awesome. Or if he shows me something, it's like, sweet, that's. So we're just really supportive of each other's styles. And to be honest, there's never been an instance in any of the songs where we've kind of not been happy with it. So it's kind of liberating just being able to write whatever you want and know that it's going to work. So yeah, Mike shows me the stuff, but I mean, I've never said to him, that's not good enough, because I mean, it's never not been good enough. It's always been awesome. We were just picking up where you left off, but basically, I didn't really say anything you hadn't said. So if you just want to continue from where you were about mix, yeah.
All right, yeah. So like the demos are all, we both talk, go over each demo, and like I would never release anything that we're not both happy with. And so, Mike played a massive part in with the mix and the master and actually shaping this overall tone of the album at the end. We mixed the last two together, but Mike's leaps and bounds over me in terms of ability. He's gotten so good over the last few years at mixing. So, he's played a massive role in the overall sound of this album. And like I wouldn't want to put anything on the album song-wise or music-wise that Mike's not happy with either. So everything, has to pass through both of us before we end up putting it on the final product.
Yeah, but like I was saying, there's never really been an instance with any of the songs where we haven't liked what the other's written. I mean, it's always just worked out that it's really good, So.
Yeah, we're sort of lucky. Like going back to what we were saying earlier, we're both on the same page in terms of composition and the way they tie in together. So we're pretty. It's pretty easy going in terms of ideas. Mike will send me a track, and I'll pretty much love everything he sends me, and vice versa. So yeah, we're lucky in that respect. We're just very similarly musically minded.
So, Mike Wilson, how did you go about recording this album?
So it was all done just at home. So I've just got a home setup. So I record all the guitars, bass, keyboards, just through my computer. The drums are all programmed, just because we don't have the ability to set up and get a really good drum sound. Plus, I can't really play drums to save myself. So we'd have to, find someone with the ability, with a good setup and recording ability to do that for us. We'd love to record real drums in the future, but I guess just time-wise and budget-wise, this hasn't happened so far. But yeah, so it's just a basic setup of guitars and bass, keyboards, and then I'll record the vocals in the same space as well. So it's all just done at home by ourselves, really. Yeah.
That's really interesting, because I've talked to a few bands who record everything except the drums. And the drums have just become, in terms of program, they've just become quite good that you can actually put it on an album and it not be sort of a sore thumb.
Yeah, definitely. I think the technology's come such a far way, even since we started doing this. And, it's only been 5 years since I started writing with Lysithea as well. We've always used programmed drums, but I think when they're used well, like you say, like it's almost it's really difficult to even pick that they're not live drums. And if they're mixed well, I don't really have a problem with them being on an album. I know it's a bit of a sore spot for some people. They write off an album as soon as you find out that it's a drum machine playing. But I think for our purposes, it works really, really well. Like I said, I'd love to record live drums because I think it would just add a little bit more atmosphere. That sort of just that human touch would be really, really great to have on an album. But this works for us in the meantime.
And Mike Lamb, how do you approach the mixing and mastering, especially sort of being your own sort of special sort of project?
Yeah. I mean, It was easier this time because it's obviously so much easier to be objective when you're not working on music you've written yourself. So it was good being able to work on I was working on Lysithea, but at the same time I was working on something Mike had written and recorded, so I could be objective about the sound and not trip over you know just when you've written something, it's easy to get caught up in the fact that you wrote that. So I don't think you're always very objective about that. But the good thing about Sojourner is that it's done so well that, compare it for a small band, it's done quite well, which has let me buy a lot of gear that I couldn't have otherwise afforded. So I'm sort of trying to work towards like mixing as a career would be kind of the ideal, really. So it's really cool to be able to actually practice doing that on a project that means so much to me. So I was just kind of tried to do the best I could on it. And I mean, it's like anything, you're always getting better. And I'm a lot better now than I was 5 years ago. But at the same time, there's even bits of this album I listen to and I'm like, knowing what I know now compared to 6 months ago when I mixed it, there are things I would do differently now. But I mean, that's always going to be the case, with anything. But it was all mixed and mastered here at my house, just at my home studio.
It's fascinating. I think almost the majority of bands I talk to, maybe not mastering, sometimes not mixing, but so much of the actual process they just do themselves, particularly at home studios. Talk a little bit about how you've sort of gained that experience. For what are the sources that you've sort of drawn upon?
Initially, when the band sort of formed, it was just sort of learning. I bought Cubase 5, and I just taught myself how to do all that stuff. I learned, just from the ground up. I was just having to work stuff out, and it wasn't, obviously you learn a lot of bad habits doing it that way. But I think the big turning point for me came when there's an online sort of production-focused school called Unstoppable Recording Machine, and it's run by three guys. It's Joey Sturgis, who's well known for producing a lot of. He did a lot of that sort of mid 2000s deathcore stuff, which isn't really my bag personally to listen to, but he's a really good producer. And then there's A.L. Levy, who was in that band Darth, and he's produced a lot of stuff, including some Black Dahlia Murder stuff. I think he worked on Everblack, and another guy, Joel Wanasek, and the three of them have this really in-depth course, and they have this forum on Facebook, a private forum. So when you sign up and you become a member of that, which is like a rolling month-long thing, you're basically connected with producers like Troy Madsen and Jacob Hansen, and it's tons of really big producers are part of this group, and you can ask them questions, and if you've got an issue, you can just post in this Facebook page, private Facebook group, and people, you just have swaths of people that will help you out with any issue. So like really quickly you can improve. So, I mean, that was the big turning point for me. And I just found once I started doing that, and every month they give you the stems of famous, really, really songs that have done really well. So like the first month I signed up, they were doing, I can't remember. But they have stuff like, they give you the stems for like the Lamb of God song, Redneck. So you mix that from scratch. And then they have this like 9-hour course of Machine, the guy that mixed it. Sort of, he mixes it from scratch, so you can see every step of the way what a professional mixing engineer does to a song. So yeah, I mean that's taught me more than any amount of forum diving would ever teach me.
That's really interesting. Getting back to sort of the more album work, Mike Wilson, how did you approach it conceptually and lyrically?
So as with I've written the lyrics for all three albums that I've been on, and Lysithea, and as always, this one I wrote the lyrics once the music was complete. So that just allows me to you just sort of really take in the atmospheres and vibes from the music, and just sort of lets you sort out what sort of theme or just how you want to approach the lyrics. So this time around, like once the album or the music was complete, it just had this sort of big sort of melancholy vibe, and just sort of a feeling of just solitude. And so I sort of rolled with that for this album, and ended up just coming up with the concept for this one, which is just sort of just it tells a story about just mortality and love and loss, and just sort of a sort of a narrative. Like, it's not a particularly like involved story line. It's just sort of more of a feeling that sort of dragged out throughout the 6 songs. So it's the lyrics and concept are always dictated just by the mood of the music.
Now, across sort of all the work, space seems to be kind of a consistent motif. Michael Amb's talked a little bit about why he's attracted to that. Why have you sort of been attracted to that as well, Michael Wilson?
I don't know, really. Like, it's not so much that I have like a fascination with space or anything like that. It just seems appropriate for our music once the music comes to life. Like, every time we've got a new song, or even just down to specific leads or melodies or riffs or just keyboard atmospheres in the songs, I'm always just reminded of sort of the cosmos and, just night sky and nebulas and just all that kind of space imagery. And I don't know, like it just seems appropriate, really, at the end. Like, we can sort of tie in the space theme in various ways, whether it's like in a storyline or just in like imagery for the lyrics. But I definitely don't have any sort of deep fascination on a personal level with space. It just seems right for the band, really.
One thing that sort of I know, I shouldn't say stood out, but one thing that I kind of noted was a way has that kind of, I don't know, that sort of gothic metal, rocky feel that was like, that reminds me of a certain period of a lot of bands. Comment, if you can, on sort of that track in particular.
That song is, I totally get what you mean. It kind of reminds of the more kind of upbeat tracks, from like the sort of the classic, like peaceful 90s doom death bands like Paradise Lost, and sort of that mid to late 90s era Catatonia. I definitely get that, and a few people have commented on that to me as well, which is really cool because I'm a big fan of all those bands. But I guess it's funny, that song kind of ended up being like my version of like an arena rock song in a way, like just with that slight up-tempo part. And then the middle section's actually heavily influenced by, like, I really like a lot of progressive rock bands. So bands from the 70s like Camel and King Crimson, that kind of stuff. So that big middle section, and with the clean guitars and like the mellotron keyboards and the big sort of guitar solos, that's more influenced by that sort of era of music than anything in the doom death kind of scene, I would say. So yeah, it's funny, I always just sort of considered that my take on a sort of a hard rock song from the 70s, which is, obviously it doesn't really sound a lot like that, but I've always gotten that vibe from it.
It's sort of interesting what other people kind of pick out when the sort of track is laid down and complete. So you guys joined a label for this release. Talk a little bit about that process and why you wanted to do that.
Yeah, like once the album was complete, we definitely wanted to release it on a label where it's been 4 years since Realms, and I think we're a lot more comfortable trying to put our music out there, and just, you know, sort of we want people to hear it because we really like it and we're proud of what we've achieved. So having a label is always a good way to help you do that. And I guess our experience with our other band, Sojourner, has helped us come more comfortable with dealing with labels, and we've had really good experiences with that band. And our previous promotion of our albums, like Realms, it was pretty piss poor. Like, we really didn't take it that seriously, and there's definite potential if we'd tried harder for those last couple of albums to reach a wider audience. If we tried harder. So we just wanted to pair up with a label who liked the music and were, you know, worked well, and just helped us sort of put it out there. And once the album was complete, we sent it to a couple of record labels, and one of them was Reign Without End, or Nurture Marked Productions. And Rob there, he's a really, really cool dude, and he's got a great taste in music. And across the two labels, Reign Without End, sort of the more kind of doom and dark music oriented sub-label of Nature Marked, which more focuses on like black metal and atmospheric black metal, that kind of stuff. He really liked the album, and it just fits really well on that label. And we're really, really happy with working with him and how the end results come up. It's just been a pleasure. Nothing was a problem, and it was just a really easy process. So, it's definitely helped us sort of get this album out there to a wider audience, which has been really cool.
Yeah, I feel like our previous albums, I think we were never really confident enough that they were sort of where we wanted them to be, to the point that we just didn't really approach labels. And we were kind of, I guess, uncertain about the whole process. But with Sojourner, we were on Avant-Garde, and now we're on Napalm, and seeing what a label can do for you just convinced us that this was the right time for us to do that.
More generally about the album, why did you pick the title Star-Crossed?
It just kind of tied in with all the themes of the album and the atmospheres. So there's a definite sort of theme of like love lost and sort of separation between a couple in the album concept. And so that sort of like troubled romance, you know, coupled with just the atmosphere of the album and some of the more kind of like space imagery throughout the album, it just seemed like an appropriate phrase to use that kind of just summed everything that I was going for up, really. So, yeah.
And what about the artwork? Who'd you get to do that, and what was their brief?
Aeneas, sorry, I probably mispronounced her name, but we worked with her with Sojourner. She did a couple of t-shirt merch designs for us, and she's just fantastic. Like, Aeneas Malgrew Art is her Facebook page, but just you describe to her what you want, and she nails it every time, and she turns it around so quickly, and she's just got an eye for like picking out what you've asked for out of a concept. So she was the first person we approached, and we absolutely loved what came out. It's a beautiful cover, and you really need to see it in conjunction with the booklet artwork as well. She's just done a fantastic job.
Yeah, we basically just we sent her the album, and I just wrote like a brief sort of overview of the album concept, and within a week she'd send us back just a sketch idea of what became the front cover. So, and it was just perfect. So everything in the physical copies of the album, all the artwork was just the first, that's what she came back with us to us with initially. Like, we didn't ask her to change anything really. It was just perfect. So, and it really captured the vibe of the album so well. So we're really pleased with it.
I think I saw you guys mentioning in another interview, like the future of Lysithea and kind of how you might approach the next album. Talk a little bit about what the future of Lysithea holds.
I think hopefully one day we'll be in the same city again. We haven't lived in the same place since Lysithea has been a two-piece, and I think it's been about, I don't know, like probably 7 or 8 years, I guess, since me and Mike actually lived in the same place. So yeah, it's been a long time. So we'd love to actually be in the same city and get together and sit down and actually write a truly collaborative album. So one where we weave our own ideas together, and we will both perform on each song, rather than just have it sort of, I do this song, Mike does this song. So yeah, like I think it would add like a really sort of fresh flavor to it, and just give it would still sound like Lysithea definitely, but I think it would give like a really fresh spin, and it would be a really interesting process to work through, I think, after having sort of running, I guess, solo for so long.
Yeah, I mean, the only times me and Mike are really in the same place now are when he comes over for like Sojourner shows. So we haven't been lucky enough to be able to do that, but it's sort of the end goal is that we will be every album will be properly collaborative, definitely.
I want to ask you some other sort of questions, as well as some sort of more personal questions. And I think that sort of segues nicely into Sojourner. Talk a little bit about that, Mike Lamb, and where sort of a little bit about the band and where it is at the moment.
It sort of just started. Actually, Emilio. So it started as me, and actually, it first started when Emilio, who is our vocalist, contacted me on Facebook one day. He really liked the first Lysithea album, the instrumental one, the second one, Here at the End for Things, and he suggested we work together one day. So we sort of made plans on and off to work together for a couple of years, and one day, I just sat down and wrote one of the songs, and then I asked my wife if she wanted to put some tin whistle on it, because we were kind of going for a sort of atmospheric black metal thing, and we put that up as a single, and it just racked up a whole bunch of views on YouTube. And then eventually we ended up with getting the interest of Avant-Garde Music, an Italian label, quite a classic Italian label. And then we worked on the first album. And as we were working on the first album, I asked Mike if he wanted to do bass. And so we put that together, and then that album did really, really well for a small band. And then, fairly soon after that, I think it was like a couple of years. I think it was 2 years. Was it 2 years or was it 1 year? I can't remember. I honestly can't remember now. We wrote the second album, The Shadowed Road. And then just after that, we played our first live show. So Mike came over for that. And we played in, did the pre-show for North of the Wall in Glasgow. And that was a good night. I mean, there were a few technical issues and stuff, so that sucked. But unfortunately, Mike had to go back home, and we had to get a stand-in bassist. But then we played, a show in Germany. And then, for the last year, shows have just sort of taken off. And we recently signed to Napalm Records, so that was a fairly big step. And just a couple of months ago, we got back from a tour with Harakiri for the Sky and Draconian, who actually Draconian were quite a big influence on Lysithea. So that's kind of where the band's at now, really.
That's really exciting. So a couple more sort of personal questions directed towards both of you. Why did you start listening to heavy music, and what attracted you to it?
You go first, mate.
I think I was first attracted to heavier music when I first started playing guitar, really. So I started playing guitar when I was 11, so I just started immediate school, so secondary school, and started taking guitar lessons there. And I guess that in conjunction with just songs that I heard on the radio back then, it just started pushing me into that area with more sort of intricate guitar work. So stuff like Metallica and Iron Maiden and all those classic metal bands that, you know, lots of people start off in. That was definitely my beginning in sort of heavier music. And I used to just sort of come home from school and just sit in my room and just learn all of these songs on guitar, so all the classic bands. And as that progressed, and I got into a lot of like thrash metal, and it took a wee while to get into the more sort of extreme genres, I guess. I was probably about 13, 14 or so. After a few years of playing guitar, that I started sort of getting into more extreme metal. So it was bands like Opeth and the Catatonia, early Catatonia, those sorts of bands that sort of got me into the, I guess, you know, the harsh vocals and that kind of thing. And that just sort of opened up the whole world for heavy music, really. I think I wasn't really into the whole death and black metal thing for those first few years, but once I got into it, I was hooked in it. It just all sort of steamrolled from there, really. So, yeah, I think I've got just playing guitar to thank for getting into heavy music.
Yeah, and I mean, mine was fairly similar. I've got an older brother who's he's about 7 years older than me, so I was sort of getting his trickle down music, and he was always getting me into stuff like Metallica, and he played guitar, and I thought that was pretty cool, and I wanted to give it a shot too, and that was that. Yeah, like, and then after that, it was just like Mike said, you know, it's just a sort of slides from one extreme to the next until, you know.
What was the original sort of drive to create music rather than either just listen to it or even play it? What was the drive to kind of create something original?
I think part of the attraction is just, I mean, it sounds really shallow, but for me, it was like you get to a certain point and you're just playing in your room and you kind of just want to have a band of your own. And it sounds pretty shallow, you know, wanting to just do the band thing, but it always seems like it's going to be pretty cool. And me and Mike got talking, and then we started doing it. And then, you know, once you actually have a band of competent musicians, it's just like you really can see, you know, you can see the appeal and the sort of the opportunities in writing stuff that you love and just sort of writing what you want to hear.
Yeah, I think that's a big part of it is, like, personally, there's only so long you can sort of just roll with learning other people's songs before you want to take a stab at it, and just sort of, as you develop more competency on your instruments, you do know what you want to hear, and sort of it comes down to you creating it in the end. So, making a band and joining up with other musicians is just that step to just sort of make music that you want to hear before anyone else, really. Like, that's what it is about in the end. You please yourself first, and if other people like it, then that's really, really cool. And there is that element of excitement that comes from playing as a band, when playing live shows. And we were playing together at local bars here in Dunedin when I was about 16 or so when we started doing that. So as teenagers, that was a really, really exciting time, just getting to play a set of original songs for local musicians and just people, you know. That was a big deal for us back then. And we both still really, really like playing live. Don't get to do it near as often, well, particularly me living in New Zealand. I haven't really done much playing live lately, but it's still just something, and I don't think you can be honest, it's going. Yeah, so the creation of music and that excitement of playing live just sort of keep feeding the desire, keep it going.
So you guys have worked across a number of different projects together. What's kind of enabled you to not just play together or write on the same band, but kind of like there's kind of a really good working relationship between you guys, I feel. What sort of enabled that?
I feel like we're just really similar people, and neither of us take stuff too seriously, you know. I mean, obviously throughout working together you have like your little disagreements about stuff, but me and Mike have been like best friends for just probably 15, 16 years now, and it's just if you don't take anything too seriously and don't I guess neither of us have particularly big egos, and I feel like that really does help because not having any sort of ego clashes just means everything's chill and it's kind of sweet as, so.
Yeah, that's the thing. Like, it's just like, it's right. It's writing with a friend, basically. We're not trying to prove anything to each other. It's just we're both in it for the love of music, and it's just cool that we happen to be good friends outside of that, just from having known and sort of worked together for so long. So, like that's all it comes down to, really. It's just very similar musically and just good friends, really. So it just makes it easy and a pleasure to do.
I feel like our love of Sade. We both share a deep, deep love of Kame Sate, so that has really bonded us.
It's the golden nectar of the gods. We've consumed many peanut satés.
I mean, it's even got thanks in both of the previous album credits.
Fueled by satay.
One final question before I let you guys go. What have you been listening to, reading, or watching lately?
Oh God.
You go first.
Recently, I actually just reread one of my favorite series. Well, it's not really a series; it's like a 3-part book. Actually, one of the songs on Realms, "The Lighthouse," was written about it. It's Jeff Vandermeer's Southern Reach. They actually made a Netflix movie out of it called Annihilation, but they kind of changed it a little bit and butchered it. But the book's really good. But I'm just reading a series by a Chinese author. It's a sci-fi series called I can't remember what the overarching series is called because it's got a different name in Chinese, but it's basically called The Dark Forest, and it's kind of about about communist China and kind of crosses crosses a massive timeline about making contact with this other alien species which is coming to wipe out Earth, and it's really, really good. I'd highly recommend it. Listening to, oh God, just a ton of stuff. I've just been sort of diving through all of the 2019 and late 2018 releases recently across, metal mostly. Honestly, I can't, for some reason, maybe it's 1:30 in the morning, but I'm totally blanking on. No, there's lots of good stuff that's come out this year. Give me a few minutes. Wilson, do you?
I haven't had a lot of time to sort of keep up with much new releases or anything like that. But one thing I have come across in the last few weeks is the new album by Illimitable Dollar. Her band Australian, you might know them from Sydney. Really cool atmospheric death band. I
interviewed their drummer the other week for another one of his projects, and they're on my list to interview, actually.
Oh, very cool, man. Yeah, that new album's awesome, eh? I've been listening to that a lot in the last week or so. Just very, very well done.
Is that the one you said?
Moody, atmospheric death. So that I've been listening to a lot of that, and other than that, I've sort of been revisiting sort of old classics that I haven't listened to in a while. I've been listening to Moon Sorrow's back catalogue a lot. They're pretty much my favourite band in the world, so I sort of go through sort of a massive listening binge for them sort of every year or so. I'll never get sick of them. But yeah, other than that, I haven't really been reading or watching a lot of TV. Just a little bit of music here and there, but I'm a bit starved from new music this year, actually.
I actually just thought of probably the two albums I've listened to most. The newest, it's a little bit old now, but the newest Mournful Congregation album, Incubus of Karma.
Oh, yeah, so good.
So good. And the other one's a bit of a curveball. It's a band called Health, and they released an album called Volume 4, Slaves of Fear, recently. And it's like, I don't know how to describe it. It's like kind of like dreamy industrial music that's just it's so beautiful, but it's so heavy as well. I actually saw them live in Glasgow a few weeks ago, and they're one of the most unique bands I've come across in a while. And I'd really recommend even if you're not into that genre, as a metal fan, check out Lysithea because it's a really, really excellent album.
That was Unearthly Burial, and before that we heard Away, both by Lysithea from their album Starcross. Thanks to Mike Lamb and Mike Wilson for chatting to me. Really, really enjoyable to get their perspectives and the history of this band and this kind of complicated web of how it's developed and progressed. But before I leave you, I'm going to recommend you your movie, because that's actually what I've been spending most of my time over this week I've had off doing, as well as actually backing up some of my old files from my radio days, which is kind of in a weird way important to me, although I'll probably never listen to it. But it's one of those things where it just feels nice to have those products, something you've made, something you worked on. It's really rewarding to kind of release them and then have all the artifacts, like this is how it's made, this is what I did to work through it. I do a very similar thing for all the interviews and recordings I do for this podcast as well. But in terms of the movie I want to recommend, it is Silent Night, Bloody Night. Released in 1972, it's kind of an example of an early proto-slasher movie. It has a lot of the tropes, but it is certainly not an artful movie. Not that necessarily you'd say that slashers in general are very artful, but I feel they have a very basic competence and they have a bit more funding and a bit more understanding of what they're trying to do. This movie certainly doesn't, but it's in that perhaps it's some of the most interesting stuff, because it features menacing phone calls, it features the by-the-numbers killings that you'd later find in slasher movies, the typical villain with very slasher motivations. I find it very interesting. It's not a great film. There's sections in it which are narrated, sections in it which are supposed to be backstory, and those can be very boring and very just uninteresting. But the movie in general is, I find, historically very interesting. See how some of these early aspects of the movies, which I guess you would say love, but in a kind of complicated way, how they've kind of developed and taken form, which is very interesting. So if you're a fan of horror movies or slashers in general, definitely give this one a watch, but more with an eye to what it means rather than how you are entertained by it. You can catch me on social media, AusHunger, that's AUS Hunger, Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. You can also send me an email, australianhunger@gmail.com. Any comments, questions, and if you're interested in an interview, maybe we can set something up. I'm working on getting an interview out on the weekend. Really, really excited about that one. But until then, bye. Thanks so much for listening.